Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Even though it's a topic I get to with many of my guests, I feel like it's been a while since we had a good chat about meaning and purpose. We've talked about finding your why and your ikigai. We've talked about authenticity and the significance of inflection points. We've talked a lot about curiosity and learning and the search for meaning. I'm a big fan of curiosity. But today, I'd really like to continue that search for meaning and explore it and explore purpose with a gentleman who not only lives a purpose-driven life, he helps others to define and live theirs. He's a former military commander who leads logistics and supply chain programs in the private sector now, and he's followed his passion for lifelong learning and started a YouTube channel called The Meaning Forge, where he methodically interviews leaders to discover how they pursue and make meaning in their lives. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome to the show my friend, James Benton. Jim, it is good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Hey, thanks, man. I'm doing pretty good, and it's great to see you too. It's been a while.
It has. It's been, it's in the scheme of things, it hasn't been that long. Full disclosure, I met Jim late last year through our mutual friend, Tracy Phillips, who has also been on Jim's show and my show. So thanks, Tracy, can't shout out Tracy enough. She's such a delight. And by the way, anybody who's listening, go look for Tracy Phillips on LinkedIn, buy her book, support her in any way you can. She's just a tremendous person. And anyway, she connected me with Jim, and I immediately we hit it off, and Jim interviewed me for his show, and I think my episode will probably be out around the same time as this episode's coming out, but we'll see. But Jim put me through the ringer, man, just trying to figure out how I derive meaning from my life, and I think we'll get to that a little bit. But before I hand it over to you, Jim, first I just want to say thank you very much for your service. Jim was in the Army for a while, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I did mention he was a commander, in the intro. But I can't thank you enough for all you've done and for your continued service, and the way that you bring that to bear. And that's something that I think people who transfer over into the private sector, a lot of military folks who I've talked to, they carry that with them. They carry that kind of discipline and meaning, into the rest of their lives. And I like the way that you've turned that into your quest for meaning. Or at least you've turned part of that into your quest for meaning, because, you draw from a lot of sources. But hey, man, it's my pleasure to have you here. So let's just kick it off here. Just how'd you get to where you are? You're really young, you have a newborn son, practically a year-old son, you're just right at the starting gate of your professional career, and yet you've done so much. So I'd love you to kind of help our listeners understand who you are.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just first start off with who I think I am at this moment in time, right? And that is somebody who likes to learn about myself and the world around me, so that way I can empower others to make meaningful contributions to their life, right? And one of the things that I, kind of wrestled with is that for still a long time, and learned to verbalize it. I'm a native North Carolinian, grew up here, went to ECU. Started, growing up per se. And I joined ROTC, joined the Army, commissioned in 2013 as a second lieutenant, one of the logistics branches in the Army. Was sent to Europe in 2014 to the 173rd Airborne. So that was a great experience over there. I was there from 2014 2017 doing logistics, working with a bunch of international partners and NATO members, trying to build. One of the sayings was make 30,000 troops look like 300,000. And of course, pretty relevant today, considering what actually has happened in 2022, right?
Yeah.
So 2014, we started to see that happen in Crimea. And so that's where we kind of start. And great experience, great people. I was a salty little lieutenant who had nothing really to stand on. And so I started learning more and trying to figure out what the right questions were. I'm not going to be 100% successful. And so then in 2017, I PCS back to the States. I go to Captain's Career Course in Fort Lee, Virginia. I become a captain, a multifunctional logistician in the Army. And about the same time, I'm completing my master's of science in logistics supply chain at the same time. and I go to the home of the airborne, 82nd in Fort Bragg. America's, and this is just the inside joke here, America's whoopee, which is an army term for a poncho liner. By the way, they're great. I highly recommend them. They're extremely warm and they're super comfortable.
The poncho liners for the 82nd?
Well, just poncho liners in general. But any veteran knows that we have whoopies for a reason, and we never grow out of them.
All right.
So I do some a little stint up in the division staff for a little bit, just kind of learning and doing a job. And then I get kicked down to 2nd Brigade Combat Team, the Falcon Brigade. And from there, I become the HHC, the headquarters and headquarters company commander for the 407th. So I'm a company commander, not a crazy high level commander, just a company commander.
Just
a company commander. And it's like herding cats, because in that, the battalion commander, technically, like, the battalion commander falls under an HHC.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, who has to track his property and his personnel actions and whatnot? That's my job, or was my job. So I was the guy saying, "Hey, your dental's coming up, sir. You have to go get your teeth cleaned." So it's like herding cats. And then that command was interesting because the previous guy was fired on the spot, and then it's like, "Hey, you're next in the chute." It was like, cool. So never back down from a challenge, take responsibility. And then from there, I became Echo Company Commander, which is a forward support company supporting an engineer battalion. And an engineer battalion, I would say, like, equivalent would be a 300 person construction company, right? And so I had to have maintenance for dozers and transportation and fuel management for all of those. And I was their senior logistician, and it was a great time. Had a great time in that command.
Were you stateside at that time? Were you here in the States?
Yeah. All of this is taking place in Fort Bragg, home of the 82nd. Mm-hmm. And so great experiences. And about October of 2019, I was like, "Hey, I'm pretty much ready to get out." Time had come that it was time for me to go. And again, not because of anything bad, just the Army there's a time and a place. And that was that. And so I start getting out on May 3rd. I actually changed out of command of 2020. And like within 2 weeks, right, lockdowns start happening. So I'm sitting here just like focusing on myself, trying to figure out what I want to do. Also, their fun stuff, diving into online debates and all other fun stuff. And not always going to recommend it, but one of the things was like, how do we find meaning in life? Mm-hmm. And that was a really key thing for me that I really wanted to wrap my head around and try to at least understand, right? Learn more about myself and the world around me so that way I can empower others to do the same. There's that why again. So I do like a Jumpstart Your Why. I read a whole bunch of books. I've always been reading books. And I kind of start my podcast in January of 2021, give or take. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing it kind of ever since, on and off a little bit, but working it. I've been a little bit more consistent now since I'd say maybe about October of last year, because the first 8 episodes were a disaster. But Meaning Forge, I think, is much better now. And I appreciate the first 8 people, but and the lessons that you learn from those 8 interviews are still applicable. I actually had it titled Meaning Forge, and it was the library of experience. Mm-hmm. And that's just too long. So
okay, there's a lot going on here. And first of all, again, thanks for your service. Like, so much for somebody who's just coming out of school. Something you said earlier, before we get into the meaning, because I do want to get into that in a big way, but, to understand, I think, why your search for meaning is meaningful in and of itself, mm-hmm. I think it's important to really get like where your mind is at. And, when you got out of college and you immediately, get into the Army and you're commissioned as a lieutenant, right? You're suddenly in command of people. Right now,
give or take. You're leading.
You're leading, right? Leading by authority initially, because that's the system. But But people are successful in those, in that situation. It's not always by authority. You have to be able to inspire, and you have to be able to lead, like by example, or you have to lead people to do things they don't necessarily want to do. I mean, obviously, it's not the same as a corporation where people can just up and go, if they want to. But that said, you call your podcast The Meaning Forge. And I wonder if when you got out of college, you went through a sort of forge of your own in the military. Of course, there's the physical stuff, training and all that, but just holistically, that you went through this process where you're forced or suddenly thrown into these positions where you have to lead.
Mhm.
So there's two things here. Number one, you had to suddenly lead people. And number two, you're being told right off the bat, you have to do a lot more with a lot less.
Yeah.
You're sent over to Europe, right? Shit's happening out there, right? This is around the time of the Crimea situation with Russia. You reminded me earlier.
Mhm.
And, which is kind of ironic being where we are today at the time of this podcast. Obviously, there's a lot of trouble in the Ukraine. But that said, right? I mean, that being in the NATO environment, you had a lot of work to do at that time. And the one thing you said is making 30,000 troops look like 300,000, and which is, definitionally doing more with less. What was going through your head at this time? And are there any kind of lessons you pulled from that you want to share and that maybe led to the Forge?
No, I don't know how directly they led to the Forge. I mean, there is a leadership segment, I think, in the Crown with the Forge, and it's there for a reason. For me, I guess generally, I was not the best lieutenant. I will come out and say it. I was not the best lieutenant. I had all the heart. I wanted all the responsibility, all that fun stuff. There was a few factors kind of coming into me, or coming into play that was painful. So while I did always talk with NCOs and stuff like that and get their feedback, I was a very, I guess, maybe arrogant person. A very arrogant lieutenant, very disenfranchised with the Army. And keep in mind, you've only been in the Army for like a year or so. So why are you disenfranchised? Chill out. That's my me looking back at it. It's like, you might want to chill out a little bit. You've only been in the Army for a year. So for me, that was there was a turning point after my first year on station, like in Germany, where I was still kind of saying, "Oh, we can't do that. We can't do this. We can't do this. We can't do that." Or literally, it was like a broken record. And of course, then when you start saying that, people don't trust you, so on and so forth. And so,
so interesting.
I had a lot of learning to do as a young leader. Just because you're forced into a leadership position does not mean you'll do that good or even great. So, and that's kind of one of my points that I would say is you still have to develop leaders. And so you have to force them into those positions, and you have to help identify those patterns and have those conversations. And sometimes leaders or those people just aren't ready for those lessons.
Is that part of the kind of standard operating procedure for the military? Is just like throw young people in and just kind of see how they do?
Well, by virtue of a lieutenant, right? You kind of do that. Now, for a second lieutenant, they frame it as you should always be learning, right? Like you need to shut up and learn too, right? But I think the issue was by the time I got my unit, I went through TRADOC and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is not the Army in its entirety. And it was a little disenfranchising. However, still slowly rolls into all the people listening. That's why I say I wasn't the best lieutenant, and you still have leaders no matter where you are, or if you see the potential for someone to be a leader, they're not going to be there when they first step into those shoes. They're just not typically. Maybe 1 out of 10, but 9 out of 10 people, when you put them into a leadership position, are going to struggle. They're going to start learning who they are. They're going to start learning how they relate to people. They're going to start learning those little aspects of those failures within that. And so for me, it's always about a key lesson was, kind of forgive myself and start hitting the books. Like within the first year, I started really the Army taught me something. And then I was like, let me go read about logistics in the Army. And so I picked up just about every manual and piece of doctrine in the Army. and then read about my customers, and then read about all these other things. And so by my time, when I left my unit, one, my leadership style had changed drastically. Now, it wasn't exactly perfect. And of course, I had a few other jobs. And they were like my boss, like, you have the knowledge of a senior captain. And I'm like, I just read a bunch of manuals. So it just goes to say, and you still have to empower people. And there's a whole other dynamic there that is you will always struggle with. And I actually, on my LinkedIn, I wrote 6 hard leadership lessons from an Army captain, which I think kind of catalogs my leadership journey. That's still accurate today, and can maybe pull that up and go over some of those rules or those moments.
Well, it's really interesting because you hit on a couple things while you're pulling that up. You hit on a couple things that happen a lot, or that I hear a lot. And the first thing is, first of all, your kind of humility as you think about. You said, I wasn't a very good lieutenant, like when you first started. And who can expect somebody to be, right? I mean, who can expect somebody? It's almost like every bad military movie ever made, where the fresh out of ROTC lieutenant is trying to suddenly, command all these hardcore grunts, and like it just doesn't go well until he learns the hard lessons of life, and then he's buddies with everyone, but then he learns to be a great commander. It's like kind of one of those formulaic stories. Obviously, it's never that simple, but
some don't learn,
and some don't, right?
Yeah, and so I mean, but then everybody has different leadership styles too. So,
but it's fascinating. So you started off by saying that that you weren't a good lieutenant at first, but then you hit a couple of the keywords there where you started to learn, right? You forgave yourself, and then hit the books. So it's about learning and changing and understanding that, we hear this a lot. Your mindset has to shift. So that's the first thing just to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind that you said earlier was when you're talking about the Meaning Forge, the podcast, and you said the first 8 episodes were a disaster. And I will point my listeners back to any number of my episodes, especially earlier on, where we talk about the concept of shiteration, right? Iterating, even though something is going to be shit, you have to keep at it and keep improving, because the first couple of things are just really, they're just there to learn, really. And I mean, if you're not ready to go out there in public, fine, I get it. But if you're not ready to take any risks, especially with something that has almost no downside, like a podcast or like a video, something like this, right? I mean, really, what are you going to possibly do? People are going to say, oh my God, I'm never going to ever pay attention to this person again. But that's what plays in your mind, right? You're just like, oh my gosh. But I mean, you keep at it, you improve it. And then like half a year down the road, you now have something to talk about. Man, look, go ahead and listen to my first couple of episodes. Go ahead and listen to that first solo episode I did. Oh my God, it's such a different ball game. I mean, I felt good about it at the time, even though I know it wasn't great. But it's something that I think creators have to just recognize. This is what's going to happen to them. Generally speaking, most people. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple of freaks in nature out there who just like flip on the mic or turn on the video or just like put their pencil or pen to paper and are immediately creating a masterpiece. Maybe
1 in
Mozart.
a billion.
Yeah. I agree with you on that one. But it's interesting how you just kind of, immediately hit on those themes. And I want us to keep that in the back of our mind, because when you get to the Forge, and we will get to the Forge, to me, it sounds like, those formative experiences really had a lot of influence in the way that you try to draw this information out from other people. I don't know. But it just occurred to me that these, this is like, you're talking about the military, and you're facing the same problems that any young leader, new leader, and sometimes old leaders, face in situations. And, you stuck with it. I guess the wheat was separated from the chaff in some ways, and you ended up, doing pretty well for yourself in the whole thing, learning, becoming a leader. So I just thought that was an important observation to make. And you wanted to share the 6 lessons?
Yeah, sure. So you guys can find this on my on my LinkedIn page. And this kind of covers a catalog of, I guess, of different things that have happened. And so the 6 hard lessons are: make a decision. I do not know everything. Leaders make leaders. You own your relationship with your team and your boss. Seek first to understand, then be understood. That's habit 5 from the 7 habits of highly effective people. Governing yourself is a true testament of your character. And then lastly is join the Odyssey.
It's a nice flow of these 6 lessons, right? So making a decision, I don't understand. I mean, I do understand, but it's such a hard thing for so many people when faced with, an accountability or responsibility to actually make the call, and for me, it could be something like, do we go with the way that this paragraph is written or do we go with the way that paragraph is written? Because I work in communications, and as my friend says, it's PR, not ER, right? There's really not a lot on the line most of the time. I mean, it's important, but that's one kind of decision that doesn't make sense to waffle on. But if you're in the military and you have, literally the things that you do could somewhere down the line result in some grievous error, there's a lot of weight on each one of those decisions.
I mean, I would just boil it down to probably saying, you're going to make a decision that's going to send someone to their death regardless. So it's almost how you want to send them. And I know that sounds really morbid, right? But if you're in a convoy and you're ambushed or whatever the case may be, I haven't been, but I'm sure many vets would agree that, hey, lieutenant, sergeant, soldier, I need you to make a decision. Like whatever that decision may be, just make it, even if it's wrong, right? We can talk about it on the backside. If we get out of this, we'll talk about it. But until then, we just got to make decisions. It's just like, I guess, kind of maybe alluding to later Star Wars, is Rogue One, right? You got to, from one step to the next step to the next step, you keep going.
It seems like it's just so natural, but like when you have to make a decision, when so much is on the line, it takes a certain amount of, what would you call it? Because it sounds like bravery to me, but at the same time, I don't know if that's always true. It's really just like the ability to say, okay, we're doing this and I'm going to have to pay the consequence. Maybe it is the recognition that you have to be accountable, finally, that helps you make that decision. I'm not sure.
I mean, in the heat of the moment, it's, I would say, it's making sure that your team survives.
Yeah.
Right. To the best that you can. Now, the problem again is with any time you go to war, the enemy gets a vote. And for me, this was actually one of the reasons why I got out, was because there was such a major disconnect. I really had like a leadership burden, because I felt like I couldn't prepare my formation for war. Yeah. And I couldn't give them the best, we'll call it the best vote possible. Right. Yeah. So lethality through survivability is how I frame it.
When lives are on the line, I think certainly the forge that is creating that decision-making ability is really high on fire. I mean, for sure. I mean, so many of us go through life never having to make that kind of a decision, and knock wood, we won't have to. But look, every decision that I make, it does affect people's lives. It affects their livelihood in terms of like, hey, they have a job, they perform, they get to feel good about themselves, or they get to feel good about the work they do, or the work that they do is uplifting someone, or it's communicating something that's really important. I do take a lot of pride in that. I'm not sending anybody out to battle, that's for sure. So a little bit of a different scale, but I get that. Maybe that has a lot to do with the I don't know everything with your second part, right? Once you grasp that.
One of the conversation pieces that would definitely has made its way through multiple times in the Meaning Forge, right, is having some grace and self-forgiveness. So you're going to make it. You're going to make mistakes. Make a decision.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Well, you said that right at the beginning. After a year, you learn to forgive yourself. So it's pretty important. Mm-hmm. And what do you mean by leaders make leaders? I mean, I think it's pretty explanatory. But
so, I mean, leaders make leaders because it's a development process, right? So leaders have to spot that talent in other leaders, and even in that raw state, start to cultivate and create a space for those people to lead. And it could be leading in the company, it could be leading for X reason. or it could just being able to put their own lives together and then lead their own life. So leadership is it's a broad topic.
Yeah, no, clearly. I love this one though. You own your relationship with your team.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a tendency to blame or to try to portray yourself as a victim of the circumstances. But in the end, whether you get along with people is really on you, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would also say, it is what you make it. It's not. It is what it is. I had that's a like a light bulb moment during my transition. That phrase kind of came into being. So I have to thank Rob Rins for that one. He had a video, like a 2-minute video. But so there's two things with that. There's with your team, right? So like, let's talk subordinates. Well, you own that relationship. Like, you own their failures, you own their successes. And of course, when they succeed, you have to defer. Like, when you own it, you have to give it to them.
Yeah.
And one of the harder lessons, I think, is that people don't always realize is your bosses. You own your relationship with your boss. And there was a time where I was pretty bitter with my boss. I didn't understand it or anything like that. And I realized that I failed in this relationship. I failed to understand not necessarily what he wanted, right? But I failed to understand him as a person. And then I failed to understand, I guess it is what he wanted, right? And so the example I point to, Don Phillips writes a great book. This is a formative book for me, is Lincoln on Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Great book. And Lincoln was looking for a general to take initiative, right, in the Civil War. And he didn't really find that until 1863 when he put Grant in. And so Grant would write to Lincoln often. They would find places to meet often, and they would find that connection. So that was a kind of a light bulb moment. They kind of had to marinate for a while, because I read that when I was a lieutenant. And you own your relationship with your boss. It's important.
Yeah. Building that trust is something that comes up all the time, and it extrapolates a lot further than leadership and management. I think anybody who's listening, and we'll probably get into this at another time, maybe not on this show, but the idea of community and of building your personal brand, and a brand even, has everything to do with exactly this, with owning those relationships and building trust first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, increasingly people are, especially now when you have so much time to yourself, you have so much time where you are interacting now in ways that are beyond just the physical in person, right? And thank goodness we still have the physical in person where you can get together and see folks. But you have you're talking, you're writing, you are occasionally Zooming or squadcasting or whatever it is, where you are looking at somebody and it's a little bit better. But communication, building those relationships, it lacks the depth of those physical cues that you need to build trust often, right? There's always a lack. No matter which medium you choose, none of them are whole. So, when you write, you're presenting a side of yourself that often doesn't come out verbally. When you're verbal, you can't express yourself as clearly as when you write sometimes, so you never wholly win the situation. But you can win every single time if you have a relationship with the other person, or the person you're communicating with, that is based on trust, that is really solid, and people trust people. They don't trust brands. They can learn to trust a brand, but really what they trust is the people. And I think that's the same within a team, within a company, within a family, everything.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that's a great lesson from your 6 leadership lessons. And then you go on with seeking first to understand, then be understood. Right? Obviously, this is about listening, and which circles back to building that relationship of trust. Right?
Well, I mean, not only that, but learning to solve other people's problems. Right? So, like, and in the more complex corporate worlds that we all operate in, like, I need to listen to understand the other people's problems, and I need to figure out how I can help from my side solve some of those problems, and then build that rapport, that trust, as you mentioned, to solve greater problems together. some of this is idyllic at some
Yeah.
level because
Of course.
there's some people who won't play, but you'll find that people sometimes do want to help.
We do strive for perfection. We never attain it. It's fascinating though that these it does kind of circle back and go to that human relationship that's behind everything, and like governing yourself is a true testament of your character. I mean, this is a core concept to just about every self-help, like self-improvement, methodology or program that's out there, right? Govern yourself, control yourself, right? Circumscribe your passions, as they say.
Or align them. That's a key thing too. Align your passions with what you want to do. And I mean, that's just something that it's hard to reconcile some things.
Yeah. And but I mean, I understand like this is not something that you have to have in your mind all the time, but as a leader, it is certainly critically important. But this last point that you have, joining the Odyssey, this is the journey, right?
Life is not about the destination, ladies and gentlemen. It is about the journey, unfortunately. Or fortunately, right?
Yeah.
The destination kind of sucks.
Well, we think so. We will. Well, we certainly don't know. So it seems like it sucks to me. But yeah, yeah.
So yeah. I mean, join the Odyssey. Take those steps. There's a culture out there, especially on LinkedIn, right, where people want to help you, and even you'll have to sift through people. I mean, some people are there for the wrong reasons, but join the Odyssey, get out there, start your thing, make decisions, build trust, govern yourself.
Did you choose the word Odyssey purposefully?
Yes.
Rather than journey?
Yes, I did. I'm kind of poetic.
So are you supposed to be Ulysses, or are you supposed to be one of his crew, or?
Just in general, just join the Odyssey, right? Because it means a journey in its own right. And so just join the Odyssey, join the journey.
And it's that Odyssey, right? That journey, I think, that I want to really dig into next, because so we've been talking about your leadership lesson, and you know what, like, to be honest, everybody who's listening, I've known Jim for a while. We've spoken a few times. I had no doubt that we were going to go in different directions on this, when we chat, because I'm really fascinated with his experiences as a young leader and learning through that. But this Odyssey that you're going on, this journey, right? So Jim's, if you can't see this, but behind Jim, as I'm looking at him through Squadcast, there's a hammer, there's a sword. Is there a crown there too, Jim? I didn't see it, but
no, there's not a crown, but there is a calligraphy pen up there too.
There's a pen, there's a hammer, there's a sword, and when I say hammer, I mean there's Mjolnir. There's like there's the Thor's hammer basically, and and a few beautiful kind of wall hangings from military service and so on. At least I'm looking at 30, 40 books probably behind him, and a little bourbon in the corner. Very nice.
Yeah.
But
bourbon,
that
scotch,
said, right? So we're looking at this like your office, even your workplace is set up as though you're about to head out to battle or head out for peace, right? You have a pen, you have a sword, and you have all the tools that you need, the books, the learning, all surrounding you. This is very reflective of who I've kind of come to understand you are, Jim. Going out on that Odyssey, being prepared and having all that, right? That quest for meaning is kind of, what you've started to really dig into in your podcast. I'd love you to take us through the Meaning Forge a little bit. Even though those first 8 episodes weren't that great, and you were refining your method, right? Take us through this. What is the Forge? Why am I looking at these symbols? And let's kind of dig into a little bit. How do you help people find their meaning with the Forge?
Yeah. So first off, when I started this podcast, I had to be very deliberate. It's again, not about the destination, like number of views or something like that. I had to like really kind of calibrate myself and say, hey, like, why am I doing this? And so kind of go back to my why I mentioned earlier. And then also kind of, if I were to spend my life, I guess, kind of doing a few things, I think one of them is listening to people, their stories, and how they make meaning in their life, and see if there's some kind of ontology that's some kind of substance that is that we can ground ourselves to, that maybe just isn't repeated in a self-help book or some high-end esoteric, and I use that word very carefully, set of philosophers, right? Because not much is esoteric now because we all have computers and Google. But that was the mission, and I wanted to see that, and I wanted to have it extend. Really, the question, it's the hardest question to ask, and it's also a question that I don't think I'm going to find the answer to. I'm actually just literally a drop in the ocean in trying to find the answer to this question.
And the question is?
The question is fundamentally, how do we make, how do we find, how do we embody, and how do we share meaning in our lives? And I'll kind of start to see some trends here. And so I was out walking one early morning, like you normally did back then when I still was in reasonable amount of shape. And heads up when you get out, if you don't stay on it, you get a little bit bigger. Combine that with a child. So I was out walking and these images were coming to mind. And there's also some other things kind of going on in the background because I'm also kind of like a low key poet. So I was toying with these ideas and I was toying with these symbols, these things. I didn't quite know how to grapple with them. And so I sat there one day and I'm just like, well, let me just kind of put this on paper, like the actual symbology. And it went through a few drafts. But like accessories, ladies and gentlemen, if you get dressed up and you need to look yourself in the mirror and take away one item. So I went through a few iterations, and for me, the pin or the hammer, right? Make and find, the sword, the pin, and the crown stood out, and they stood out because I was also heavily inspired by it's called the Chi-Rho, I think. So it's a Catholic symbol as well. So it's like the cross with the P, right? And so and it's in a circle. So oddly enough, like it all kind of worked right there. So I pulled these things together, and the hammer is definitely Mjolnir's hammer, right? It is like, just think of all the Marvel movies where Thor is going in and just like getting all the lightning and then like bringing it down to bear. But the question I pose to you is this: is he using it correctly? It's a hammer, right? And not only that, but lightning, to me, that's like ideas, that's people. It's like pulling from the divine, your influences. And we start to see this process forming. And you make something, and you can call it you can use chisel, whatever, but you start to make something and then it goes into the sword. And that is what you make, and you begin to embody, like now visions of Excalibur, visions of some of the Christian mythology, like some of the Christian symbols too, because the sword is in there for sure.
Yeah.
So, really like understanding and grabbing and acting on what you have there is important, and carrying your sword with dignity. And so in confidence and judgment, because when you swing that sword, you're going to make a judgment every time, right? So do you pull it out? When do you pull it out? How do you pull it out? It also means revelations, and it's a revelatory thing. And then the pen. So when we look at the sword and the pen, they're on the same level, and I would argue they're of the same substance.
Mm-hmm.
And the pen is, I'm not going to lie, it's partly inspired by Hamilton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something there, right? So it's like writing. And so the musical version, I have read some of Hamilton's stuff, so it's not too bad.
Yeah.
And the same things you can do with a sword, you can do with a pen, but also like, what is a pen? Capture something, it shares something. It's you can record in a journal, you can record for other people. You can share those things, and you can leave your mark, your legacy, right? And from there, we have the crown. And so the crown is, that's just heavy as the head that wears the crown, because leadership is hard, and taking on that responsibility, or taking on responsibility in general, is hard. And so you have to govern yourself. You have to govern govern yourself in terms of also how you deal with people. And so how you lead others. And from that, I had a great process, and I kind of had this thing. I call them also the weapons of war, oddly enough, right? So there might be a poetic type of thing there. There is, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. There
Okay.
is. And then I need a story, right? So I need to understand where people come from so that I can start pulling out the material with them. So this is not where I just sit there and I pretty much kind of leave people's meaning out of it. Typically, I want them to tell me where they come from. Tell me about themselves. Tell me significant moments. Let's look at some attributes. Let's look at these how does this come in together? By the way, you can make a sword wrong too, and that has ramifications. Then it's like, here's your sword. How do you wield your sword? How do you use your sword? You're using it properly. Confidence, empowerment. You share it. How do you write your legacy? Now, those just two questions on most interviews that I just stick to, and I get told they're doozies, right, Dan?
They're doozies. I mean, you could do a whole hour on one of those questions, and in fact, we have. But it's so what understanding the story, and we'll get back to the pen and the crown in a minute, but like understanding that story and your process, right? When you bring people through the forge, and I like this. I just love the imagery of it, in that you are guiding people into the forge, and even though the folks you are interviewing, you're interviewing them for a reason, because you've seen something in their story, you think they have some kind of understanding of meaning in their life that you want them to share. But I think it's a revelatory process for that person in a big way, and I know that from my own experience. And I haven't heard the episode yet, so I can't. I'm putting it out there. I can't vouch for the results, but I will say that self-examination, using those symbols as a guide, was really useful.
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing? What am I making? What am I creating? What is my legacy? Am I wielding this properly? Am I making the right decisions? What decisions have I made that have cut the right way or the wrong way? And then, how is it moving forward? And what's my lasting legacy? And, what lessons do I have to offer from all of this? And to tell you the truth, going through the process, I was like, oh, wow, I know a few things. I've been through some stuff, but
Exactly.
But at the same time, I realized that at different points, it's probably earlier in my life, I don't know if I would have been able to really handle the Inquisition that you put me through. Did I say Inquisition? I didn't mean.
Oh yeah.
The interview.
Okay. Okay. Tell me how you really feel with your Freudian slip there.
Oh no, it was awesome. It's so but it's just, I'm looking at a guy with a sword and a hammer on his wall. What do I expect, right? But there's a certain beauty to it, and a poetry to it, as you said. Weapons of war. I want to hear more about that, but drawing stories from people. You have people tell stories, and then from that, do you then lead them to the meaning do you conclude and kind of draw your own conclusion about what the meaning is for most of your guests?
Not necessarily, because I think it's more important that, my guests walk away, I think, kind of how we're talking about this now, right? With this idea that, hey, I did something and I revealed something, and I'm probably going to ponder on it, or the seed has been planted, right?
Mm-hmm.
For them later to harvest. And I will sum up, right, the key highlights of the conversation in the summary. And unless I'm becoming more and more direct and kind of asking, like, what do you think that your why is, or something like that, I'm very rarely saying I don't offer a prescription. And the reason why is because I think everyone has a great story. If you're introspective enough, I think It's okay, right? I haven't turned anyone down per se,
Mhm.
but everyone has a story. No matter where you come from, I want to hear it. I want to go through the process with you because, again, I'm actually pretty diverse if you look at who I've interviewed.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because from all of that, you can see some things forming, my hope is that I learn something, my guests learn something, and my audience learn something.
It's very similar, and you said this even at the beginning, like that we have some similar things about us and the way we approach things. I'm not necessarily trying to forge any particular like a pattern, for my guests. I'm not trying to necessarily come up with specifically meaning and purpose, but we often get there, and through stories people tell, and just by understanding what people are saying. But what I really love about your approach is it is your way to learn, right? You've designed a curriculum that you are sort of in a very clever and sly way forcing people to teach you. Like you put people through this process, and I do not mean to frame this in any negative way whatsoever. People volunteer to go through your process
Mm-hmm.
and talk about these things, and they get this tremendous benefit. I know that I certainly did, and my listeners will know that I often struggle with what my why is and what my purpose is. I still do. Like it's hard for me to kind of nail it down. And even my podcast, I've been asked, "What is it about? What is it about?" Well, honestly, I always call it my own learning journey now these days. Like it's my way to learn. It's my curiosity on display, and that's what you've put a structure to it, which makes a lot of sense for somebody who's been in the military and is a logistics and supply chain pro. Whereas I'm coming more from the other side of the brain, a little bit of a more creative. So I'm a little more freewheeling, but the point is that it is a learning journey, and it's something that that I value a lot. And when you took me through your process, that's what I felt too. I felt that I was learning my own, I was forging my own kind of purpose and meaning in a way, and when we see the final product, I'm really hoping that there was some wisdom that I was able to convey.
You got wisdom in there, man. You got wisdom
thanks, man.
in there. I promise.
But just like my guests do, and so do you. Like this is the whole thing. Like that's why I love this medium. I love like this kind of these conversations that just go to these really cool places. And anyway, speaking of those cool places, we were talking about the Forge, which is a very cool place. It's a very hot place, but it's a very cool place.
Yes, it's life in general.
Yeah,
it's life.
So the hammer, the sword, the pen. I think the most difficult part for me was the crown.
Yeah,
just understanding really, what those burdens are and how to kind of express that. And I still have some issues with, like I said, expressing purpose and meaning. But let me ask you this. I mean, we talk about the meaning forge and, finding your why. What do you see? Is there a difference between meaning and purpose as you see it?
I think they're synonymous. I think meaning, purpose, there's like a few other words out there. Your why, right, they're all synonymous. You can use them interchangeably. I know I do.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I keep thinking like meaning is deeper to me, right? This is the way I look at it. Like meaning is almost unchanging. There's meaning in things. Your interpretation of that meaning can change over time. Like your interpretation of what it means to you and that, like how you use that, I don't know how it's reflected in your life can change over time. But a sword means these 6 things, and that's pretty much what a sword means.
Yeah.
Right. But your life has all kinds of different meaning. Like I understand, like you can go in different places. The meaning of your life, what you think the meaning of your life is, can change over time. But ultimately, there's probably a meaning that's there, right? That's yours to discover, but it's there.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that kind of prodded me along this was Viktor Frankl. I mean, there's a lot of people who prodded me on this, like make no mistake, right? Like talk about like influencing and stuff like that. Well beyond their grave. And some people who are alive now. So the idea here is, and again, I'm not doing anything too new here. I don't think I'm doing a whole lot new, but changing a few symbols is you have to understand your past, right? Which is why we have to have a life story in the Meaning Forge. You have to have some significant things that are salient to you in that moment. That may change over time. Maybe there's an experiment, Dan, that we can do, or maybe we do the whole process again in a few years and see what happens, right? See if your interests change. And you understand your past, the good and the bad, not just the good and not just the bad, right? The good and the bad. And we start working our way up into those influences, those things that mean something to us, those attributes, and within those stories, just like any motif that we all read in, whatever story. And we start to kind of look at it and apply it, and we can embody it, and then we can share it and discipline it, right? Wear that crown and go through life. And I've always said you can make multiple swords. You can go through the cycle multiple times. And I think every time it's still going to be good.
It's definitely a tremendous exercise. And, the content that you have on the Meaning Forge on your YouTube page, like the interviews you have, I haven't gone back and looked at those first 8. But now I'm going to have to, because you said they were terrible. So now like the train wreck, I have to go back and look. But I know that you had our friend Tracy on, and I know that you had a few other folks on that I've also had on my show. Lou and Sherry were also on my show. They were my first, maybe my first and only podcast I've ever done with 2 guests at once. Love them.
Yeah.
She has a hell of a story. She's been through the Forge. Absolutely.
They do.
So, I'm going to have to go through and listen to some of yours. But what I wanted to ask you actually is, the Forge is an exercise in creativity. It's an exercise in curiosity. It's these things that's why I really gravitated towards what you've done here, because those are things that are very important to me. Those are, I don't know if they're my core values but they're definitely connected to them. And, but as a Forge, right? It is by nature something that, or like, if you think of what a Forge is, it's a hell of a hot flame or fire in the middle of, a workshop or something where, you're putting in pieces of metal typically and using that heat to form and shape that metal. And, blacksmith. But it doesn't have to be just that. It could be glass. It could be, other anything that requires intense heat to be bent, shaped, etc. But in and of itself, I'd say it's not a fixed thing. Temperatures go up and down, right? You can expand the forge or kind of, shrink it down. You can cool it off. You can shut it down. Whatever you could do. The point is, it's not a fixed point. So, are you forging the Forge? I mean, are you changing the way how do you see it evolving as you go forward?
Don't quote me too much on any of this, right? So I've got to figure out a better way of getting interviews, and also kind of showing clips and stuff like that. I mean, there's a whole slew of like SEO type of things, right? But that's more viewership. As far as the content of it, every interview is different. Every single one. I cannot. The only thing I can standardize is the pin. That's it. I have a hard time standardizing the other questions, and I don't think I want to either.
What's the question behind the pin that you standardize?
The 2 questions I standardize behind the pin are 2,000 years in the future. What is the essence of what you want to be remembered by? And then it's same time frame, 2,000 years in the future. What is the one item that you want found in your home, like some archaeological dig, like one item and why? That's the only thing I can standardize, because leadership topics change according to people, right? Different conversations, different expertise, different other things. The sword is also like people's judgments and issues they have. I mean, there's some commonality there in what I can ask. And then the hammer's the same way. But overall, the Forge will I think change in some ways. I think it's time to start doing maybe like a meta analysis. So kind of looking at it from more of like, hey, here's some lessons that I'm learning and that I'm wrestling with based off of my conversations. Like, here's the pattern. And these 5 people said this, so that's important. We need to start dialing in on this. And that's, I think, kind of the next step. And then that will probably, hopefully, maybe take down some of the clips type stuff. But
yeah,
I'm still trying to figure out some stuff.
Is there anything you can exclude my episode, of course, because we know that was wonderful. But is there anything from the rest of your Meaning Forge episodes like that right now come to mind that are just like moments in time that really pieces of wisdom that you just we're so fortunate to have heard, and you feel like, wow, this was spot on.
Almost every interview
Yeah.
has that. And that's the problem. And sometimes I don't even capture it in the clip, right? I do it intentionally because, I still want people to watch and, grab those things. But there's so many different times. I think every interview I've run into, I've had some great lesson that can be learned from someone's seemingly benign story, right?
Like what? Is there like something that stands out?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm getting into a few. So Tracy with the word just, I did a clip on that one. That was good. Like just limits you. So heads up. If you find yourself using the word just, check that word out in context and then reframe.
Mm-hmm.
One guy, Paul Vanderklay, he also has a massive YouTube presence. Wanted to be remembered. The one item was a cup of soup.
Interesting.
Discarded a cup of soup because he traded, the way he saw it is he traded stories for cups of soup, people's life stories. So it's beautiful. Like I literally had to cry. So just a heads up, I edited that out. But one person said, your attitude determines your altitude.
Ooh, I like that.
That was Larry. But then there's Stephen Spalding's one grain at a time, or having a relationship with failure. Every person that enters this forge has something to say and has a tool or a nugget of wisdom that is, or like just a general truth that just works. And I could probably create my own list of proverbs based off of just the 28 interviews that I have total, and 21 that are published or will be published by here soon. And it's amazing. It's extremely humbling.
It's like the book is writing itself, isn't it, James?
Yeah. The book may be writing itself. I don't know, but I still have to go back and read all of that or re-listen to it. And
of course,
that's hours.
I often, I these days now I get asked a lot because, I've got 81 episodes up at the time of this recording. I mean, this one will be 80 something or maybe close to episode 90. Anyway, I keep going. I keep going forward. And I'm proud of all of them. Even though the first one or two was, there was some wacky kind of shiteration that was happening, right? But all my guests, I've been really proud to have everybody on my show who've been on my show. I've learned something every single time. There's a lot there, a lot of content there. And, to think about going through and like adding my take and saying, these are my learnings, I think there's a hell of a book there. I'm just having too much fun talking rather than writing at the moment. Right. So I'm enjoying talking and listening, of course. So, I'm going to keep riding this and keep going and just, exploring my curiosity and learning, and which I think is what you're doing with the Forge.
Yeah.
And, which is kind of like brings us really, I think, right towards the end here of our conversation. It's gone so fast, Jim. I'm like, and I knew it would. What I wanted to ask, so, what I wanted to ask you though is, you already talked about how you think the Forge is going to evolve a little bit. Is there anything else on the horizon that, you're looking to fix? I mean, you mentioned earlier knowing the problem that needs to be fixed. The Forge, I think, is serving a tremendous purpose by helping people find their purpose and by being a learning tool and a learning platform. Is there anything else on the horizon that, you're thinking of exploring?
Well, that's a loaded question because there's a bunch of things there. So besides the instantaneous inspiration that I think I receive, it's both. It's how as I say it, it's energizing and exhausting at the same time.
Yeah, I 100% understand.
So there's so much inspiration there, and so I'm kind of pulled in a few different directions. Maybe there's a book, around episode 100. I don't know, but that's pretty far out, right? So let's stay the course.
Yeah.
It's also given me great material for my own, I guess, poetic adventures. And on top of that, I mean, it's hard to believe I'm an introvert, believe it or not. Hard to believe that. I have to really assert myself in more ways than one, but I've kind of learned to, again, listen, understand, ask questions. And in this journey, I will say that just the tagline is forging individuals, right? And there's something that has to be said about the individual. There's also something that needs to be said about the individual as they navigate the community. And that is a very key thing that I don't quite know how to lean into, because just like in this conversation, right? So you come on my podcast and I go on yours, and you're revealing things in this conversation that I didn't think about.
Yeah.
And the same, like that is important, because it's, when we talk about meaning and we talk about responsibility, there's a few things that are happening here. It's in context of both the person and their relationship with the world at every level. So like the village, the community, the city, the whatever. And that is extremely important to recognize, I think.
I think that whole point about community, and we haven't talked about it, even though it is in the about, section of of Meaning Forge on YouTube. If anybody wants to go take a look, community. You've hit on something really important there, and I realize we're winding down, but the future is community, I think, and I don't think that I agree with it, because I'd be remiss if it was my original thought. It's not. I've heard it now in a few places, but it's been really well explained by one of my favorite people in the entire world, Mark Schaefer, who is, a marketing and communications leader, a futurist. He's doing so much with helping people understand how to be better marketers. But, and I use marketing loosely, because actually I think he's really leaning more towards simply communication, full on, like just how brands and people should express themselves and share and learn from one another, build relationships. It's about relationships, and he's written like 9 books so far. I'm a big fan of his, and lately, I'm involved with a community of his, and he has said that the future is community. The future is belonging, a sense of belonging, a sense of community. Community is based on people, and then people, the relationships with the people. Relationship with people is based on trust. Trust is based on building your personal brand and being known, right? That's how you build trust. So the community comes down to the person, like really, is if you can draw that line really fast. And like a healthy community comes down to trusting the people in the community clearly, right? And if you're going to build a community around one person or around a brand, in case of marketers or communicators, the trust is the key core element there. Mm-hmm. But what you're talking about here is not quite in that same space, but the idea of community, I think, is something that we have to really dig into more. And a community based on meaning, like-minded people who are, who've been through the forge, but who also really kind of recognize the value of the forge. You're building trust with the people who go through the forge. I think the people who go through the forge are, trusting one another and so on. There's a common experience. I think that's an area to explore for sure. And I think you're going to just have a wonderful time of it in the future, because you're just so, like, not only disciplined about it, but you're so thoughtful about every step of the way. And it's that thoughtfulness, I think, and that real genuine curiosity that comes through in your interviews and certainly in our conversation today. And for that, I'm very appreciative and grateful. And I'm glad I know you, Jim. I mean, I'm so happy. Thank you, Tracy, again. And I think that I wish I wish the Forge the best of growth, of course, but I think you're going to do great things with it. And I'm proud to be a fan. I'm glad to be watching, and I'm glad to be part of it. So Before we wrap up, I just want to say, everybody, check out, if you want to find out more about Jim, look up James Benton on LinkedIn. His name will be spelled properly in the episode title. You can check out Meaning Forge on YouTube. Just search for it. Search for Meaning Forge, MEANINGFORG, 2 words, on YouTube, and you will find it. It's awesome. He does a video introduction. The symbols that we've been talking about are graphically introduced to the audiences. It has everyone is a really good show, really, and it's broken down in an understandable way where you get the journey to meaning. And I really think it's got a lot going for it, and it's only going to get better. Jim, any last words?
Oh yeah, just real quick. So my final word. I'm joking. We are actually on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. So I have a Buzzsprout directory and all other fun stuff, so people can find me on I know for sure Apple Podcast.
Terrific. Thanks for telling me.
So check that out. I'm getting there because I have a limit to how much I can upload per month. And so I'm just trying to, get there slowly. And Dan, it's been great. Thanks for kind of revisiting, kind of doing like the after action type of thing here. And I do appreciate you. I'm glad to know you as well. And I like what you're doing here too. I think we had a great conversation. And as always, man, just let me know how I can help you and in your endeavors. So
you got it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Tracy. Thank you, everybody else who knows everybody and has got us all to this point.
Thanks, Jim. Terrific. It was so great to have you on. And I reserve the right to bring you on again.
Yes, you do.
Right on. All right. Thanks again. Thank you.